I work the night desk at a hostel in Reykjavik, and there's this American couple in room 12 who thinks 2 a.m. is the perfect time to have a full-volume debate about which Icelandic hot spring has the best Instagram lighting. They're shouting recommendations back and forth like they're in a sports bar, not a building where 30 people are trying to sleep. I knock, explain that quiet hours started at 11 p.m., and the guy looks at me like I've just told him oxygen is illegal. He says, "But we're whispering." They weren't whispering. A documentary film crew 3 blocks away could have picked up their audio. He insists Americans have a constitutional right to normal conversation and that Iceland must be confused about freedom of speech. I mention the police can issue fines, and he laughs, says, "For talking? That's adorable." 10 minutes later they're back at it, now discussing rental car insurance at the same volume, and I'm filling out the incident report while dialing 112. My cousin manages a guest house in Kyoto, and last month an American family checked in for a week-long stay. First night, 11:30 p.m., they're playing card games in the hallway outside their room with the kids shrieking every time someone wins. In Japan, buildings go silent after 10 p.m., sometimes earlier. He approaches them, bows, explains in English that other guests are sleeping. The father waves him off, says, "Kids will be kids, man, it's barely midnight." My cousin tries again, mentions that neighbors in adjacent buildings have complained. The mom interrupts, says they paid for the room so they'll use the whole floor as they please. She cites some clause about common area access she definitely misread. By 1 a.m., the building manager has called the police, who arrive and speak to the family for 20 minutes. The dad keeps saying, "This is absurd, we're just having family time," as if volume isn't the variable anyone's concerned about. I teach English in a suburb outside Singapore, and one of my neighbors is this American expat who works remote. He's on conference calls from midnight to 4 a.m. because of time zones, and he uses speakerphone with his window open. In Singapore, quiet hours are 10:30 p.m. to 7 a.m., enforced by town councils and police. First 2 weeks, I let it slide. Then I realize I'm waking up to phrases like "circle back on the deliverables" and "synergy-driven approach," echoing through my bedroom wall. I mention it to him in the lift, keep it polite. He says he didn't think anyone could hear, then adds that in California everyone works odd hours so it's totally normal. I point out we're not in California. He says he'll try to keep it down, but explains his clients expect immediate responses. Next week, same thing. Another neighbor files a complaint with the town council, and within days he's getting warning letters. He posts in an expat Facebook group asking if Singapore is anti-business, because apparently requiring silence at 2 a.m. means we hate entrepreneurs. I'm a security guard at a student residence in Oslo, and there's this American exchange student who insists on practicing her saxophone at 1 a.m. She's in a shared building with 40 other students, and Norway has strict quiet hours from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. When I knock and ask her to stop, she says music is how she decompresses after studying and that everyone back home in her dorm practiced late. I explain that Norwegian buildings have different rules and she counters with, "But I'm paying rent, so I have rights." She pulls up her tenancy agreement on her phone, highlights a section about personal use of space, somehow missing the entire noise regulations addendum. I mention the police can fine her up to 10,000 kroner, and she laughs, says that's illegal because art is protected expression. 2 nights later she's at it again, and the student council files a formal complaint. She emails me saying this is discrimination against musicians and that Norway clearly doesn't value creativity. My brother-in-law runs a vacation rental in a village outside Zurich, and last summer he had American guests who decided to throw an impromptu barbecue at 10:30 p.m. on a Sunday. In Switzerland, Sundays are almost sacred quiet days, and evening noise restrictions start even earlier. Neighbors heard them setting up chairs, laughing, clinking bottles, and one called the police within 15 minutes. When the officers arrived, the Americans were genuinely confused. The host, a guy in his 30s, explains they just wanted a fun last night before flying home and didn't realize grilling in the garden at night was a problem. The officer explains Sunday quiet rules, mentions the fine, and the guy argues that the rental listing didn't explicitly say, no Sunday night barbecues. He's scrolling through the property description looking for proof, saying they would have booked elsewhere if they'd known Switzerland was this strict. The officer writes the fine anyway, and the guy leaves a 1-star review claiming the country is antisocial and that Europeans don't know how to have a good time. I work at a call center in Manila, and one of our American clients visited the office for a week-long training. He's staying in a condo complex in Makati, and the building has quiet hours from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. Third night, he's on his balcony having a very loud phone argument with someone back in the States about a delayed shipment. It's past midnight and he's pacing, gesturing, full shouting mode. Building security calls him, asks him to lower his voice, and he responds that he's outside, not inside, so indoor noise rules don't apply. The security guard explains balconies count as part of the building noise policy, and the guy says that's technically a gray area, and he knows his rights as a tenant. He brings up American tenant law, which has zero relevance in the Philippines, and insists he's done research. By 1 a.m., 3 neighbors have complained to the building manager. The manager calls him directly, warns about fines, and he replies that he'll be gone in 4 days anyway, so enforcement is unlikely. Next morning, he complains to us that Manila has way too many rules, and asks if we can reimburse his accommodation for the inconvenience of being asked to be quiet. I'm a receptionist at a boutique hotel in Porto, and we had an American couple last spring who thought 11 p.m. was the ideal time to rearrange their room furniture. They're on the second floor, directly above the breakfast area and next to 3 occupied rooms. Portugal takes quiet hours seriously, especially in residential neighborhoods, and our policy is no loud activity after 10 p.m. I call their room, explain the situation, and the wife answers saying they're just optimizing the space for better feng shui. I mention other guests are complaining, and she says if the walls are that thin, maybe we should have built better. She suggests the hotel invest in soundproofing instead of bothering paying customers. Her husband takes the phone, asks if there's a specific decibel limit in writing, because if not, they're technically in compliance. I mention police can be called for disturbances, and he responds that moving furniture isn't illegal and we're overreacting. By midnight, they've started vacuuming. A guest in the next room knocks on their door, and they tell him to file a formal complaint if he's that bothered. I call the police non-emergency line, and when the officers arrive, the couple acts shocked that furniture moving is considered a noise violation. They're given a warning and spend the next morning at breakfast loudly telling other guests that Europe doesn't understand personal freedom. My uncle owns a small guest house in Hoi An, and last year he had American guests who ordered late-night food delivery at 1 a.m. and decided to eat it in the communal courtyard. They're talking at full volume, laughing, plates clattering, and Vietnam has quiet expectations after 10 p.m., especially in residential areas. My uncle comes downstairs, politely asks them to move inside, and the guy says they paid for access to all shared spaces and the courtyard is listed as an amenity. My uncle clarifies that shared spaces have time restrictions after hours, and the woman argues that the booking site didn't specify when the courtyard closes. She pulls up the listing on her phone, triumphantly points to a photo of the courtyard, says nothing in the caption mentions time limit. My uncle explains Vietnamese noise culture, that neighbors have already complained, and she responds that if neighbors are bothered, they should close their windows. The guy adds that Americans eat dinner late all the time and this is totally reasonable by their standard. My uncle mentions police involvement, and the guy says calling police over dinner is authoritarian. They finish eating outside anyway, and the next morning my uncle finds a review calling his place unwelcoming to international guests, because apparently asking for quiet at 1 a.m. is cultural insensitivity. I manage an apartment building in Buenos Aires, and we have an American tenant who loves hosting dinner parties that stretch until 3 a.m. Argentina is social, but buildings still enforce quiet rules, usually 10 p.m. on weekdays, midnight on weekends. After the third party, I knock on his door at 2 a.m., explain the complaints, and he says dinner parties are a cultural exchange and he's helping neighbors experience American hospitality. I mention 5 different neighbors have complained in writing, and he says they're probably jealous they weren't invited. He offers to include them next time, completely missing that the issue is noise, not exclusion. I bring up building bylaws, and he counters that bylaws are suggestions for harmony and not legally enforceable. He cites a blog post he read about Argentine tenant rights that somehow convinced him buildings can't regulate social activities. I warn him about police fines, and he laughs, says Buenos Aires police have bigger problems than a dinner party. Next weekend, another party, same volume, and a neighbor calls the police. When officers arrive, he greets them with cocktails, genuinely thinking they're there to join in. They explain the fine, and he argues that porteños are famous for late nights, so this must be a misunderstanding. He pays the fine but emails me afterward saying Argentina's legal system is contradictory because tango halls operate past midnight, so why can't he? I'm a property manager in Lisbon, and last summer I had American Airbnb guests who decided to have a 2 a.m. wine tasting session on their balcony. Portugal has quiet hours from 10 p.m., and their building overlooks a narrow street where sound bounces between buildings like an echo chamber. A neighbor calls me, then calls the police, and when I arrive with the officers, the guests are mid-debate about Douro Valley Reds versus Alentejo White. The officer asks them to go inside, and the host, a woman in her 40s, says they're experiencing Portuguese culture through wine, and being on the balcony is essential to the ambience. The officer clarifies that experiencing culture doesn't exempt anyone from noise laws, and she replies that every restaurant patio in Lisbon is loud at night, so clearly outdoor conversation is acceptable. She's gesturing at neighboring buildings, saying other people have lights on so they're awake anyway. Her friend chimes in that they're leaving tomorrow and this is their last night, as if departure schedules affect regulations. The officer issues a warning, and the host tells me later that Lisbon is becoming too touristy if locals can't handle a little evening conversation, completely unaware that she is the tourist making locals' lives difficult. I work at a hostel in Krakow, and there's this group of American backpackers who brought back McDonald's at 2:30 a.m. and decided the shared kitchen was the perfect place for a mukbang-style eating session. They're filming themselves, talking through mouthfuls, laughing at volume levels you'd expect at a sports stadium. Poland has strict quiet hours in residential buildings from 10 p.m., and hostels follow the same rules. I go to the kitchen, explain quiet hours, and one guy says they're hungry and eating isn't loud. I point out they're not eating quietly, they're performing. He says the kitchen is a shared space available 24/7 according to the hostel website, so time restrictions don't apply. I clarify that shared spaces still require respectful noise levels at night, and another guy argues that respectful is subjective. He suggests I'm being culturally biased because Americans are naturally more expressive. I threaten to call police, and he says that's dramatic for a food situation. They keep filming, and 2 other guests file complaints. I do call police, who arrive and explain noise ordinances. The group acts stunned that eating can be a disturbance, and one films the officers, saying this is content gold for their travel vlog about crazy European rules. I drive a night bus route in Copenhagen, and there's this group of American tourists who board at 1 a.m. talking at the volume you'd use to communicate across a canyon. Denmark has a culture of silence on public transport, especially late at night. I make an announcement in English asking for quiet, and one woman says, "We're just talking, it's not like we're yelling." They were absolutely yelling. A Danish passenger politely asks them to lower their voices, and the woman responds that they paid for the ride so they can talk however they want. Another American in the group says buses are public spaces and free speech applies. I explain Danish transport etiquette, and he argues that etiquette isn't law, so they're technically allowed. One pulls out her phone, starts Googling whether Denmark has noise laws on buses, finds nothing explicitly about buses in her 2-minute search, declares herself right. By the time we reach their stop, half the bus has moved away from them, and I file a complaint with the transit authority, knowing they'll be gone before any follow-up happens. Next week, I see a TripAdvisor review calling Copenhagen public transport unfriendly because locals wouldn't engage with their friendly conversation. My sister works at a train station in Bruges, and last autumn there was an American couple waiting for a late train who decided to FaceTime their family back home at 11 p.m. in the waiting area. They're on speakerphone, volume maxed, and Belgium has strong quiet culture expectations in shared transport spaces. An employee asks them to use headphones or step outside, and the guy says they have a right to use the waiting area as intended. The employee clarifies that using it doesn't mean disturbing others, and the woman says they're not disturbing anyone because only 3 other people are there. She gestures at the other passengers, who are all pointedly avoiding eye contact, and claims their silence means approval. The guy adds that American airports have people on calls all the time, so this is standard traveler behavior. My sister explains Belgian social norms, and he responds that norms aren't rules, so enforcement is impossible. She mentions station security can remove them, and the woman acts shocked, says they're premium rail pass holders and that should grant exceptions. Security does arrive, asks them to leave or use headphones, and they comply while muttering that Belgium is not tourist-friendly, because apparently expecting basic courtesy is asking too much. I'm a taxi driver in Wellington, and I picked up these American passengers from the airport at midnight who spent the entire 30-minute ride to their hotel having a conference call on speakerphone. New Zealand has quiet hours, and even though taxis aren't residential spaces, there's still an expectation of reasonable volume at night. I ask them to lower their voices or use headphones, and one says they need speakerphone because they're both on the call. I explain that quiet hours apply citywide, and my next customers might appreciate a quieter car, and he says they paid for a private ride so the space is theirs. He brings up ride-sharing app terms of service, claiming passengers have autonomy over in-car activity. His colleague adds that conference calls are work, not leisure, so professional necessities override social preferences. I mention I'm the driver and have the right to request reasonable behavior, and he says drivers aren't authority figures, so my requests are just suggestions. They keep the call going, and when we arrive, they tip poorly and leave a review saying I was controlling for not accommodating their business needs, as if turning the volume down would have bankrupted their company. I work at a metro information booth in Stockholm, and there's this American exchange student who thinks the subway platform is the right place to practice Spanish lessons at 10:30 p.m. using a language app with the volume on full. Sweden has strong quiet culture on public transport, especially at night. I approach her, explain people are trying to decompress after work, and she says she's studying for an exam and the metro is the only place she has time. I suggest using headphones, and she says the app's pronunciation feature requires external audio for her to hear corrections. I mention quiet hours, and she responds that quiet hours are for residences, not transport. She's Googled Swedish transport law and found nothing explicitly banning language apps, so she believes she's in the clear. I explain that social norms sometimes exceed written rules, and she says she doesn't follow unwritten rules because they're not legally binding. She argues American educational culture encourages studying anywhere, anytime, and Sweden should respect that. A security guard eventually intervenes, and she reluctantly lowers the volume while telling me Sweden is too rigid for her learning style, as if expecting consideration for others is a design flaw rather than basic civility. I run a hostel in Tallinn, and there's this American guest who, after getting a noise warning 3 nights in a row, finally asks me to explain why Europeans are so uptight about sound. He's sitting in the common area at noon, genuinely curious, and I try to walk him through how density, building design, and cultural expectations all differ from the US. He listens, nods, then says, "But like, talking is just talking, right?" I realize some people truly cannot hear the volume they're creating, as if their own ears have a different decibel scale than the rest of the world. He checks out the next morning, leaving a note thanking me for the stay and suggesting the hostel invest in thicker walls or a more relaxed vibe. I tape the note to the office wall next to 17 others like it, a growing collection of Americans who think the solution to quiet hours isn't adjusting their volume but remodeling entire countries. I keep them as reminders that sometimes the gap between intention and impact is just a matter of volume control no one taught you to notice. Maybe next guest will bring headphones. Maybe not. Either way, the police non-emergency line is still on speed dial, and I've gotten very efficient at filling out incident reports while explaining, for the 100th time, that 2 a.m. conversations are not a cultural right.